raise your hands or whatever. There you go. Well, good evening and welcome to the Miramichi Salmon Association U.S. Atlantic Salmon Celebration for 2021. I'm your live, for now, host, Gary Tanner. Importantly, we've chosen to do things a little differently. This is not going to be a science broadcast or a look what our boots on the ground for MSA have done set of stories. Rather, we've got about 2 hours of presentations by salmon anglers, past and present, talking about why they fish, how they fish, and their remembrances of fishing for Atlantic salmon. This virtual event is free, but we thought we'd incentivize donations to help our work on wild Atlantic salmon with a drawing for an original Luther Hall painting, Goose Island Salmon, for folks that donate $50 or more to our cause. You can go to miramichisalmon.ca to donate or to maybe increase your donation. Click on that big celebration button and go to the bottom and you can handle it. And going along with this evening's entertainment, we have an online auction and raffle running through February 28th. I will try to not sound like the public television folks and break in all the time with yet another fundraising request, but we'll have to do it a couple of times. Anyway, moving right along, our first segment comes to us through the kindness of Mr. Ted Rogowski. Ted has fished the Miramichi for more than 50 years, and he has graciously allowed us to edit down his lovely video, Memories of the Miramichi, to fit our time frame and to feature some of the interesting salmon anglers of the past that he included in it. Let's listen as Ted introduces the story.
Clearwater Junction pool. Zern's humor had us fishing with a smile. He wrote the books How to Tell Fishermen from a Fish, To Hell with Fishing, Our Fishermen People, and many others. For 30 years, we looked for that last page in Field and Stream called Exit Laughing. Zern taught us to read magazines backwards, Japanese style. He anointed all anglers with absolution, observing, fishermen are born honest, but they get over it. It's a grilse. This grilse, which has spent only 1 year feeding in the ocean, is small in comparison to what is being caught today. But grilse at 3 to 5 pounds are a wonderful fish to catch. Say Miramichi and Charlie DeFeo's name pops up. guide Fred Clowater maneuvers Charlie to deeper waters. When I caught my first salmon here, Charlie shouted to me across the pool, "That salmon will cost you $1,000 every year for the rest of your life." Ted Williams, our legend of baseball fame, fished these Blackville waters. Well, it was back in 1962, and Bing Crosby joined Ted Williams on national television asking the American people to ban the importation of Danish products. The Danes were netting salmon in the open seas off the Greenland coast. Ted's guide was Roy Curtis. He uses the Lee Wolf spring-loaded trailer to land his salmon. Oh, magnificent. Oh, how wonderful. Whoa, they call that a quick release.
And why do I love fly fishing? I love this sport because of its depth. There's art and literature and life sciences and craft. But I really love it because of the wild and beautiful places it takes me, where I can connect to another of God's creatures, feel its life force through my fly rod, and release it. In 1939, Lee Wolf wrote, "A good game fish is too valuable to be caught only once." And this sport teaches us why.
In landing salmon, legendary Lee Wolf perfected hand tailing. With a short 6-foot rod, he brought the salmon within reach, seizing it by the tail. Lee played the fish hard, a minute per pound of fish, and made a gift of the salmon to another angler with catch and release, for which he is the noted pioneer. Another salmon season is now ended. The salmon has journeyed from par to smolt and a return from the oceans to the spawning beds. The brilliance of the golden leaves of fall fade into winter. With the springtime, the salmon return. Our angling spirits are renewed. These are our memories of the River Miramichi.
One of the folks that we saw in that video is Charles DeFeo. Was an artist that was born in the late 1800s and I think passed away in the 70s. He made his living illustrating books and drawing magazine covers. His art livelihood. His salmon art has graced several important books. One of my favorites, including Fishing Atlantic Salmon, The Flies and the Patterns by Colonel Joe Bates and his daughter, Pamela Bates Richards. Through the good graces of Pam, we can share with you some flies designed or tied by Charles, featured against some of his artwork also from the Bates collection. It's been said that his low mixed wing style of tying kind of laid the foundation for today's typical hair-wing salmon fly. And according to my friend Eric Pepper, who knew Charlie, for all his notoriety as an artist and a fly tyer, Charlie was a very low-key, self-effacing guy. Here are the flies and art from the collection of Pam Bates, photographed for us by Celebration Committee member Ralph Vitale. That's one of the most famous photos of Charlie with his cat on his back. And they did keep big buck salmon, didn't they? Some of his flies. Now in this set, I think we have a black dog, not sure, a rusty rat in the middle, and a copper killer probably. Now in this one, I think that is, I can't read my notes. Let me tell you. Nope, can't tell. There we are with the gold nymph. Yeah, those are a bunch of his nymphs. And right there, another rusty rat. That's a silver Satan in the middle, I believe, and another copper killer. There's a Lady Atherton up on top there, fairy quill, and really, he was great. Those spiders of his were really something. And now we have Lady Atherton, another fairy quill, and no, I'm sorry, a black heron and a purple, red, and white. How would you like to have done the Miramichi that way? This is some of Charlie's art. There we go. So now, from the past, very much to the present, and MSA's future, is a message from our new president, Dr. Robin McCallum.
Hi, everyone. My name is Robin McCallum, and I'm the new president here at the Miramichi Salmon Association. I'm looking forward to meeting all of you in person when COVID-19 is behind us. But for now, thank you for joining in virtually. Conservation has always been important to me, but one conversation has really inspired me for Atlantic salmon. I've been working these last few months with our MSA board chair, Debbie Norton, to transition to MSA. In one of our meetings, Debbie mentioned the work ahead of us to ensure there are Atlantic salmon in the river for when my own son wants to fish. My son is 7 months old, and this really struck a chord with me. We have models and science demonstrating that we are running out of time to act. This isn't just a job for me. This is my home, this is my passion, and I want this resource to be here for my son when the time comes. I want to leave our watershed in a better place. I'm eager to get to work with all of you and make important strides on Atlantic salmon conservation. We've had turnover the past year here at MSA. Change is always difficult, but this is also an opportunity to build on our strong foundations and look to the future. Let's stay focused on the work ahead of us and move forward. As Mark often says, we are here for the salmon. We all share this collective goal, and MSA has a strong team to protect this resource. You, as MSA members and supporters, are part of this team and part of our fight. It can be easy to get caught up in the problems and the challenges that are facing us. And sometimes we need to take a moment to reflect on what we are truly passionate about and working for. We have a daunting task ahead of us, but we also have tangible management ideas and solutions. MSA relies on scientific evidence, and we have solid research plans to move forward on. We are working on enhancing our communications, and we continue to collaborate with all levels of government and community groups. Having an MSA US board as part of our organization makes us stronger. There is a place for everyone at MSA. I challenge us all to jump in and contribute our time, our resources, skills, and talents to move the needle on Atlantic salmon conservation. Whether it's supporting events like this, renewing your membership, joining the board, or serving on a committee, we need your passion and your dedication. When we provide a strong, united voice for our Miramichi watershed, we can get things done. Thank you to Brad and the team behind the scenes to make this event happen. Until we meet in person, take care, stay safe, and thank you for supporting MSA and Atlantic salmon conservation.
That was great, Robin. On another note, Miramichi River System outfitters have long been very generous to MSA in our fundraising efforts, donating trips and accommodations, days on their pools. So we have decided that it would behoove us to give them an opportunity to toot their own horns, so to speak, and make little presentations, a couple minutes long, to our viewers. And with that, the Ledges in Doketown is our first outfitter.
Enjoy world-class fly fishing on the Miramichi River with a knowledgeable guide. The Ledges Inn is a premier 4.5-star year-round destination. All guest suites offer a beautiful view of the Miramichi River flowing by. Savor an unequaled gourmet meal in the licensed riverside dining room with a fireplace, good company, and a fine bottle of wine. Your dream fishing getaway is waiting for you here at the Ledges.
Next up, April Vokey has been a salmon and steelheader since she was 16. She opened her own guiding operation at 24. She started her own podcast, Anchored with April Vokey, which has evolved into Anchored Outdoors. Let's join April and her guide, Gary Colford, as they begin the quest for her first Atlantic salmon.
Hi, I'm April Vokey, and over the years, I've been fortunate enough to fish some of the world's great destinations. The Miramichi and Cairns rivers in particular hold a very special place in my heart. The unspoiled rivers and the wild salmon are what I believe are a national treasure to Canada. I hope that you enjoyed tonight's film, and thank you so much for taking the time to support the Miramichi Salmon Association and to safeguard the Miramichi and its salmon.
On an angler's confidence. Warm weather and sparkling water called me to her. Gary was waiting in anticipation for a fresh start, and I just hoped to be able to feel some sort of connection to a fish, any fish. At this point, whether it be a bass, trout, or grilse, I would have been ecstatic. Fortunately, almost all of the species in the Miramichi can be taken by the same presentation. After the fly is in the water, the natural hydraulics of the current do the rest of the work, and all an angler can do is try to control the speed and direction the fly moves. After the fly has swung around to shore, a step downstream ensures that all of the water is covered.
Oh. It's gonna happen again. Oh, there it is, there it is.
Cat, if it's a salmon, I want the net. If it jumps, I want the net.
Scary. Think it's a grill, Scary?
It's acting like a bass.
A bass?
That's what it's acting like.
Are there bass in this river?
Yeah, that's what it's acting like.
That's interesting. I think it's a little bass.
Is that a grill would be in the air?
Sure, it's pulling really, really, really well. What is it?
No.
It's not a bass.
No.
You know, this fish is fighting extremely well for its size. You ready, Gary?
Yeah, I'm gonna need you to back in about 5 feet.
And that's wishful thinking. Let me try one more.
Nice.
Is it a grouse or a trout?
Nice grill.
Oh, Gary, nice work. Thank you. You know what? I said a little prayer for that.
A grilse is an Atlantic salmon who has only spent 1 year in the salt water before returning to the river.
Little hook, I think.
Oh, she's just gorgeous. Wow,
I
she
don't
is.
take them out of the water.
Nope, let's leave her right there. Oh, thank you, you beautiful, beautiful little fish. She is so gorgeous.
That's the one we seen rolling.
That's what we saw roll. Wow, we did it, Gary.
I knew we could.
They're beautiful fish, regardless of their size, and neither Gary nor I could wipe the smiles from our faces.
I was guiding a guy from Maine. We went out and we got a 30-pounder. and I netted it. Rodney got a 35-pounder, I netted it. Then Rodney swings around and get a 40-pounder, and I netted it. So we netted almost over 100-pound of fish within 2 hours.
Now you know what happens, right? That story gets passed down to Rodney's son, and then gets passed down to his son. You're going to be legendary. You know that, right? Your great-grandson, you're going to be legendary.
No, it's like, if you could remember everything, it would be a lot of fish over the years.
Yeah.
For instance, my net, I bought the net in 1990, and it's the same net, same mash, and I don't know how many fish is in it, like over the years.
Got some history.
Yeah, so.
You know, this is a special thing. So if we could pass, let's say, for example, that you got long after you're gone, and your great-grandchildren are watching this.
Yeah.
Is there anything that you would want to say to them?
I just want them to remember me as being good. That's the most important part. Like, if they can remember me for being with them. That's it. Nothing else.
You're going to make me cry again. And you did this to me earlier on the river.
How does your, it's your family.
You're making me cry, aren't you? No, it is. It's the most important thing in the world. And I wish to God that I had a grandpa to look back at and do that with.
Wait till you get your own children, your grandchildren.
Yeah.
Then you'll remember me. So.
Well, I don't have a grandpa who fishes. So you're basically, especially if I move out this way, you can be my new grandpa.
Sure, why not?
Now, get back to fishing, because you guys are making me look like a big softie.
Now let's do it. Let's go fishing.
Let's go fishing. There are moments spent while fishing that can't help but leave an impression. Some of these moments are the fish themselves, but for me, most of them are the people and stories that I stumble upon along the way. I was at the beginning of a whirlwind journey, and I pored over the history books about people much like Gary who had kept the sport alive. Did the people of New Brunswick know just how special the province was? Did they know their very own history that wound itself along every river bend and hillside? The more I read, the more I respected the waters I waded. And the more I waded, the more I respected the salmon. It was going to be a tough week. There was no question about that. But I was curious to see just how far my respect for the land would take me. Would it be strong enough to keep me inspired? And more importantly, would it be spirited enough to keep me determined to learn more?
Well, I'm going to try not to sound too much like a national public television person, but we do want you to remember that we do have that ongoing auction and raffle online, and as well, we do have that $50 donation thing going. If you donate $50 to this event, you get in the draw for Luther Hall's beautiful painting. Just a thought. Next up, Morris Green brings us a history of salmon angling on the Miramichi. Morris spent his teaching career in the Doketown School District, and after that became the MLS for the southwestern Miramichi area from 78 to 91. Importantly, Morris is the author of 2 books, signed copies available in our auction. The first of which is of 160 years of salmon stories, and most recently, a beautiful book, Burnt Hill, A History. Here's Morris.
I'm Morris Green, and my family and I have lived on this river for many generations. And I've been asked by Brad Burns to give a short history of fly fishing on the Miramichi. And he told me I had 5 minutes to do it. And I can tell you that it took a lot longer than 5 minutes to develop the history. The first salmon fishers on this river were the Aboriginals, both from the St. John and the Miramichi, who used to go to the best fishing pools at certain times of the year to gather fish to put away for the winter, because they found that the fish that were about ready to spawn were the ones that smoked best and lasted longest through the winter. By the 1840s, young British Army officers from Fredericton in particular used to come to the Miramichi to fish as well. And they hired Maliseet guides from the Tobic, from Kingsclear, and what became St. Mary's, to bring them to the river to fish the best pools. And they often had a month's leave at a time, and they would take off and through the province, and they'd hunt and fish all seasons of the year. Really enjoyed it. It was the sort of thing they did at home, because many of them were sons of wealthy landowners in England, Scotland, and Ireland, who would come here as young army officers. Because they had wealth, they bought their commissions. And the reason they were in Fredericton is because we were always afraid of the Americans invading Canada after the American Revolution. And so these men, as I said, they were sort of the pioneers of fly fishing. And anyway, there's one other thing I'd like to mention too. It's sort of different about the Miramichi, especially the upper Southwest Miramichi. In 1834, the New Brunswick Nova Scotia Land Company bought 589,000 acres of land, basically the northern tip of York County, which included the Southwest Miramichi River from Holtville all the way to the source. And so they became very important in the development of fly fishing as the years went on. And their idea of setting this company up in the beginning was to build this farming community that would be similar to what they had in England. They imagined these farming villages established along this placid river, where they could easily move goods and services along by scows from one community to the next. Well, the Miramichi isn't built that way, and the land wasn't particularly fertile for farming. And so what the company did, it turned to the timber trade. And so they and their contractors hired loggers to go into the far reaches of the Miramichi to cut logs in the fall, sled them to the river in the winter, and drive them down to the mills in the spring. And it was from that group of experienced woodsmen and rivermen that the future guides for fly fishing were developed. It's not known exactly when people, as I said, when people started coming here, but I can tell you this. In my research, I found a painting that was done at Burnt Hill in 1854 by Lieutenant Wolfe, who was stationed in Fredericton at the time. And in the painting, he has the native guides, and he has the young fishermen, the fly fishermen. And one of the native guides was Gabe Acquin, the Maliseet who actually founded the what is now the First Nations at St. Mary's First Nations in Fredericton. One thing that really turned things around in New Brunswick was a succession of 3 governors general, lieutenant governors, as they were called today, starting in 1848 with Sir Edmund Head, who, when he came to the province, decided he wanted to find out what it was all about. And so he hired guides to take him first. His first trip came up the Nashwauk, over the portage to the Miramichi, down the Miramichi to what is now Chatham. And then he took a stagecoach back to Fredericton. And he fished on his way. He didn't catch any fish, but he did fly fish on that particular trip. That fall, he and his wife went up to St. John to Grand Falls, over the portage to the Restigouche, down the Restigouche to Bathurst, and by stagecoach from Bathurst to Miramichi and back to Fredericton again. And the newspapers of the day wrote these incredibly glowing stories about this vice-regal couple braving the wilderness and so on. And so local people sort of started thinking, hey, that's a good thing to do. If these guys are doing it, why shouldn't we do it? So they started going to the river and to fish and to the woods to hunt as well. After 1842, tensions between the colonies, the British colonies, and the Americans sort of died down a bit because of the signing of the Webster-Ashburton Treaty, which settled the border between Maine and New Brunswick. And so after that, Americans started coming in to fish as well. Probably the best known of them was Robert Barnwell Roosevelt, who was an uncle of Teddy Roosevelt, who later became president of the United States. And he wrote a book after he did a tour, actually, of the New England states as well as the British provinces. He wrote a book called The Game Fish of the Northern States of America and British Provinces. And in this book, he gives an account of coming to the Miramichi, where he was outfitted by William Wilson of what was then Campbell's Settlement, and now known as Bloomfield Ridge, where he hired local guides to take him to the head of the river, and they fished their way down. He liked Wilson. He thought he was a great fellow. He didn't have much good to say about the rest of the people who lived here. He thought they were rather a lazy, shiftless lot who should be concentrating on farming instead of logging, because he said there's no money to be made in lumbering. And so the farming was a much better way to earn a living. In 1867, when Canada became a nation, the trickle of fishermen suddenly became a flood. As I said, the local guides became engaged in the sport. And the other thing that happened was there was a conflict between the federal government and the provincial government about who actually controlled the inland fisheries on the rivers. The federal government claimed ownership, and the Minister of Marine and Fisheries at the time was Peter Mitchell from Newcastle, who in 1873 granted a lease from Price's Bend, which is just below the Holtfield Bridge, right to the source of the river, to a club that was a fishing club based at Burnt Hill. And that caused all kinds of problems because all of these well-to-do Fredericton residents, judges, lawyers, doctors, merchants, and so on, who had been coming to the Miramichi for several decades fishing, suddenly found that they were fishing in somebody else's water. Not only that, but the the group that had the lease hired wardens to keep outsiders from fishing their water. And they enforced the law. So you had the conflict between the two levels of government. Then you had the conflict between the various groups of people who wanted to fish. And the third conflict involved the settlers of the area, who, until these rich guys from the cities came out and started fly fishing, used to use the river as a source of food for themselves, and they netted and speared the fish in the fall especially, salted, smoked them, put them away for the winter, and suddenly they were told that that was illegal. Now, they used to be able to get a license for that one time from the colony, but the province of New Brunswick wouldn't sell them licenses, and so they became known as poachers. And they've resented it ever since, they and their descendants. And so anyway, out of this conflict between these groups of people over fishing pools came a whole series of things that happened. There were physical assaults, there were charges, there were lawsuits, there were court cases, there were judgments. And finally, the battle over who had the right to fish these waters ended up at the Privy Council of the House of Lords in England, that decided once and for all that the riparian rights, the ownership of fishing in this province, belonged to the landowners and to the province on Crown land. It didn't belong to Ottawa at all, and that the only jurisdiction Ottawa had was in managing the fishery. And that's still the case today. So on the Upper Miramichi, the question of riparian rights was actually settled. I can tell you one quick anecdote about that. In one instance, the chief fisheries officer of the day was a William Venning from St. John. This group from Fredericton, who the lawyer's name was John Fair, let him know that he was going fishing in this lease on the Upper Miramichi. And in 1879, the federal government had insisted that fishermen buy licenses. He had no license. He informed Venning he was going fishing without a license. Venning shows up at that pool with a federal lawyer with him, with a group of constables, and with a pistol on his hip. John Fair is fishing in the river. Venning goes up to him and he says, "I'd like to see your fishing license." Fair says, "I have no fishing license." He said, "I'm going to seize your rod." Fair says, "No, you're not." Venning says, "How much force are you going to use to keep your fishing rod?" Venning said, "As much as possible, or as much as necessary." Venning goes back, consults with a lawyer, comes back, pulls his gun out, walks up to Fair, points the gun at his head, and says, "Pass over your fishing rod." Fair then passed over the fishing rod. No shots were fired. Nobody was killed. There was no, however, it was, and they were doing this preparing for the court case. Both sides, they knew it was coming. And this was part of the court cases that went to the Privy Council in England, where the matter was settled once and for all. In any event, I can tell you that in the 1870s, amidst all this turmoil, certain groups of fishermen in particular were forming fishing clubs. The first one was formed at Burnt Hill in 1876. And the second one was formed on the Northwest Miramichi in 1882. Now, the one in Burnt Hill is the one with which I am most familiar. And it was made up of a group of people from one from Boston, Alexander Wood, who was a very prominent person in the early development of fly fishing here. The second one was Christian Robertson from St. John, Franklin Bunting Franklin Bunting from St. John, and finally Robert Orr from Fredericton. Those are three in particular I'll mention. Robert Orr was one of the original owners of Burnt Hill, as I said. There's still a pool at Burnt Hill today known as Orr's Pool. And if you look out in the river, there's a saddle-shaped rock out there about the size of a Volkswagen. And that's where Orr's Pool is. In any event, they had their fishing clubs and they became very active on the river. The other thing that I want to say is that as time went on and this legal matter was settled, other fishermen started coming to the river as well. And there was big game hunting. It was a bit like Cairns River in the sense. There was big game hunting there too. And as the big game hunting started to die out, some of the guides decided to get into the outfitting business. The first one on the Miramichi was the Griffin family from Cross Creek. They had their first river run in 1906. And their guests at that particular time came up by rail to Bristol, 35 miles overland to the Miramichi. And he hired 3 guides from Boys Town to come up river in their dugout canoes to meet the party there. And they took them down river, and that was their first fishing trip. And then it went on from there. The Allens from Peniac, the Wades from Peniac became pioneers as well. And so as time went on, some of the guests actually became camp owners along the river, and they either leased or bought properties where they established camps. And so by the 1930s, 40s, there were a whole series of camps, outfitting camps along the river that formed the basis of the local economy to a large degree. And there were guides, outfitters, cooks, fly tyers, boat makers, all kinds of people like that who were employed, merchants, and so on. And so fly fishing became very prominent, and it also moved downriver. People downriver who had riparian rights suddenly started bringing in guests as well, and so the business grew. And everything went along pretty well until, of course, as was mentioned in the earlier interview, the 50s and 60s were sort of the golden era, and the 70s, the early 70s. But then when the international predation of salmon increased, the numbers in the river declined. And so organizations like the Miramichi Salmon Association, started in 1953 actually, trying to conserve the salmon, and they're still working at it even today. And the other thing is that a lot of local people here became involved in salmon fishing, and there probably were no better fishermen on the river than the local guys who lived their lives in the river, because they were there every day and they watched it. They knew how the river changed in the spring. They knew where the salmon were laying. They knew where this river springs were, and so on. But anyway, since that time, the salmon fishing has declined. Local interest has declined because people are no longer allowed to keep fish. The industry still has a lot of followers, a lot of adherents, and so on, and hopefully has a very good future. This museum was built as a reflection of that salmon culture in 1983. And in its archives and its collections, it reflects pretty much the history of fly fishing on this river. And one thing I'd like to mention are a few of the names of the people who were involved in salmon fishing over the years. I mentioned one, this Bunting from St. John, who in 1874, in a 21-day period, caught 804 pounds of fish. On 3 separate days, he caught 10 salmon. On his way up to fish that year, he fell. He was walking along the shore while his guide poled up the river at 11:30 at night. He fell and broke his forefinger in one hand. He patched the finger up and continued on his trip, and he stayed there for 21 days fishing. His guide was John Stickney. And anyway, of the 81 fish he caught, Stickney hooked 79 of them. But of course, Bunting was paying the shots, so he claimed credit for all of them. But 1874 was a great year for him. But we'll never see those days again. But with the kind of cooperative conservation efforts that we have, we may see a chance in the future for some fish at least. But I just mentioned a few of the names. John Stickney, I mentioned. Abraham and Randy Munn. Abraham Munn was the originator of the Abe Munn killer, famous salmon fly, tied with turkey feathers. Charles and Mervyn Green. Charles, my great-great-grandfather, built the first camp opposite Gilman Brook in 1878. The first camp built for salmon fishermen. He built another one in 1885 for Joe Jefferson opposite the mouth of Clearwater. And that one was built out of lumber. The first one was built of logs. And it was written about in American magazines as being one of the elite fishing camps in existence at that time. Presidents, Grover Cleveland and George H.W. Bush have come to the river. Grover Cleveland came with his friend Joe Jefferson. They were neighbors who lived on Buzzards Bay together, and they fished together. And so when Joe Jefferson became part owner of Burnt Hill, he brought Grover Cleveland here to fish with him. And recording the trip to some degree was a fellow from Liverpool, Nova Scotia, A.W. Dimmick, who had gone to Wall Street, New York, when he was a young man, became a gold trader and retired at the age of 30. Devoted the rest of his life to being a wildlife photographer, and he was America's first to photograph a live grizzly bear and a live alligator. And he was the guy who wrote the book on tarpon and popularized that sport as well. Anyway, he was on the river in 1888. William Florence, one of the founders of the Shriners, was another part owner of Burnt Hill at one time. He was on the river. Governor William Russell, 3-time governor of Massachusetts, was a part owner of Burnt Hill at one time. And so the list goes on. Dr. Chase, George Mumford, Howard Kopp, William T. Griffin and his son Preston, Charlie and Clint Norred, Merlin and Leslie Palmer, Pearlie, Joe, Bert and Bert Palmer, Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio, Pearlie and Murray Calhoun, the Brophy brothers from Otterbrook, the Hayesville McKays, the Munns, the Norreds, the Bruces, the Hunters, and enough other men and women to fill several large city phone books. were involved in salmon fishing on this river. Fly fishing in the Miramichi was and is a way of life, a state of mind, a refuge, and a rejuvenator. Just the kind of medicine needed in our chaotic world today. It's a way of life that has a great past, and with, as I said, with everyone working together, it can have a great future. That's it.
Morris is a wellhouse of information. He's a great guy. I got to know him at the Atlantic Salmon Museum in Doketown. He's been so helpful on many levels. Next up, Upper Oxbow Adventures, an outfitting and hospitality business owned by Dale and Debbie Norton, has also always been a really strong supporter of MSA's fundraising efforts. Here are some scenes from Upper Oxbow.
At the Upper Oxbow by the Miramichi. So don't you pause or hesitate, and don't you think and don't you wait. Pack your bags and head New Brunswick way. Guaranteed you won't regret, 'cause you ain't seen nothing yet, for another season slips away. Well, when the Lord in his good time used certain reasons, certain lives, put it all together carefully to create a spot to hang his hat. And I can tell you where it's at the Upper Oxbow by the Miramichi. At the Upper Oxbow by the Miramichi. At the Upper Oxbow by the Miramichi.
Up next, Bryant Freeman is a legend among salmon anglers and tyers throughout the maritime provinces, all the rivers. He's got a wonderful fly shop called Escape Anglers. It's a go-to stop for fly tying materials, especially in Atlantic Canada. He is easily the most visible proponent of the Carter bug dry fly. That's another whole little story, but he's a great guy. He will take the shirt off his back to help you. Let's learn from Bryant.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I've been asked to present a small portion of some of the flies I use on the Miramichi. Back in 1963, I started fishing the little southwest Miramichi and spent 10 years fishing that river until somebody talked me into moving over to the bigger river, the main southwest Miramichi. I moved over there and set my trailer up at Nelson Hollow in Ernie Story's yard, along with a group of other fishermen from Fredericton, St. John, and of course I was the only one from around the Moncton area. When I started fishing there, the first salmon I caught was caught on a dry fly. I fished mainly dry flies for salmon and have pretty good results. I also had met some of the older people that were born on the Miramichi, and they taught me some of the ways of how it was on the big river. One August afternoon, I was traveling with the company I worked for, and I stopped at Nelson Hollow where my trailer was, and the river was virtually full of fish. The only problem was I couldn't catch any, and the other people there that were fishing all day hadn't touched a salmon. So what we did, we tried all our flies and we really couldn't get anything to work very good. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, Merle Clowater come out of his trailer and come down to the river and pulled across and asked how the fishing was. We told him there was hundreds of fish here, but there was nothing taking a fly. Well, Merle just wandered up to the end of Kelly Channel and made about 2 casts, and he was into a fish. He landed the fish and went and sat on the back of his boat and had a little rest. And I finished my run through the pool and went and said to Merle, I said, I wonder what they're taking, hoping that maybe he would show me what he had. Well, Merle wasn't very forthcoming, but he took his hat off, and in his hat, in the foam, was a nest of flies. And he hauled this one out, he handed it to me, and he said, try this. It wasn't much of a fly. It was a little black fly. And it's what we call today the little black dress. He gave it to me. It was literally a piece of thread on a hook with few fibers of hackle. So I stepped out where the fish were rolling, and I made 2 casts, and I was into a fish. That was the beginning of the little black dress for me, and it was, without a doubt, the most productive fly in August as the September comes along. So after that, I was taught a little bit about a fly if you notice, there's no tail. And that fly is a producer also, very good in late August and early September. One of the most important flies in my fly box is this one. That's the Carter's bug. That fly catches so many fish that some people think they should outlaw it and not be able to fish it because it decimates the salmon counts in the rivers. This is another little killer fly. Comes from my home river on the Medway in Nova Scotia. And this fly works well on the Miramichi. It's called the brown rags. Here's what a fly box used to look like back when I was starting to fish the Miramichi. This is what a fly box looks like now in high water on the Miramichi. Don't want to give too many of my secrets away, but there's my fly box that I would carry with me every day. Well, ladies and gentlemen, fly fishermen, fly fisher women, girls and boys, that's the way it is. I don't want to give any more away. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak on behalf of the Miramichi River. Thank you.
I have a fun little story to tell about Bryant. I met up with him at the big Quarryville pool several years ago, and we were just chatting, and he said, well, I never fish Quarryville. I never come here. So I took a picture of him with the Quarryville Bridge in the background. And then he said, and I never fish green machines, except there was a green machine tied to his tippet. So I took a picture of him holding the green machine with the Quarryville Bridge in the background. So and he even let me put that on my blog. But and the best part of that meeting was, and I probably won't be able to do this get it as blurry as Bryant was, but he also gave me a Carter's bug right out of that last box that he showed you, and I treasure it. It's even still got some tippet stuck on it. So that was a good meetup. Bryant's a lovely man. I appreciate him taking the time. I've had the pleasure of knowing artists John Swan and Luther Hall since way back when I ran a fly fishing museum. They're both great gentlemen to hang out with, and their art is universally respected and appreciated. And they both have made many donations to the Miramichi Salmon Association's fundraising efforts. They each have an original in our current online auction. Let's join up with the Celebration Committee member Rip Cunningham for a lively discussion with those two artists.
Good evening. Welcome to the MSA Salmon Celebration, and thank you all for attending. I'm Rick Cunningham. I'm a member of the board of the Miramichi Salmon Association, and how lucky am I to be here this evening visiting with two of the premier sporting artists in the country, John Swan and Luther Hall. Both of these artists are talented, they're avid fishermen and avid conservationists, and both have done a lot to support the Miramichi Salmon Association. Gentlemen, thank you for being here with us this evening. John, do you have an opening comment? And then we'll switch to Luther before we jump into some questions about your fantastic art.
I thought fantastic is very kind, but no, I just want to thank you for inviting me. I'm flattered, and you guys are great, and not spending time on the river this year, it's great to do it this way. So, hey, that's about it.
Great, thank you. Luther.
Yeah, I also want to thank you guys for inviting me to be a part of this. You know, the Miramichi Salmon Association has become like family to me over the years. We've been doing this for, I don't know, it's got to be 20 some years anyway. Sadly, we're not doing the Boston dinner anymore. So it was like that movie, Same Time Next Year. I really missed that. So I'm glad we have an opportunity to sort of get together again through this forum and venue.
Did fishing come first, or did art come first, or did one kind of get you into the other? Either one of you would like to grab that, or both?
Well,
go ahead, Luther.
Yeah, actually fishing came first, and I can remember my first fishing was with my grandfather when I was 2 years old, which was back in the late 40s, and we used a cane pole. It wasn't a rod, but it didn't have a reel on it. It was just a line tied to the end of this long pole, bamboo pole. And so we were catching panfish. So I started the fishing thing long before I started the art thing. Art was it was something I always did. It wasn't something I was extremely interested in, although it was fun to do. And I didn't really get into the art thing until my senior year in high school. I was taking a lot of math courses and so forth, and I had 2 study halls, and one of my buddies in the study hall said, there's some interesting stuff going on up in the art room, so maybe you ought to look into it. So I went up there, and I had a teacher who was a fisherman. He was an archaeologist, and he was a professional watercolorist. So I gradually got into it through there. And then I ran into Chet Renison years later, saw some of his artwork. I was doing landscapes and so forth here in Connecticut, and I looked at some of Chet's stuff, and I thought, geez, that's kind of the hot thing to do, I would think. Just do something in a subject you really enjoy, so I could tie in fishing and the art together. And I've been doing it ever since. That was probably mid 80s no, it's actually early 80s.
John, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, didn't John Cole have a book, Fishing Came First? Johnny Cole?
Yeah.
He did, didn't he?
He may have.
I think he did. Fishing Came First. Anyway, for me, I always liked to draw when I was a little kid, but didn't mean anything to me, but I was fortunate enough to have a grandfather and a grandmother who were superb sportsmen, fly casters, shooters. My grandfather was a tournament casting champion, and he dealt in F.E. Thomas bamboo rods and fine guns, and so I grew up with that, and it just stuck. I just loved it from the time I could walk. And he always had great places to fish. He had camps everywhere, and I just remember piling into the station wagon with my grandparents and about 5 dogs and 2 cats, guns and rods, and everyone smoking cigars and cigarettes, and it was perfect. I loved it. The art part, I don't know, it came, I don't know, I don't know if I ever really started, I guess. I always did it.
Are there some things that you find about salmon fishing and the places that salmon take us that are more compelling subject matter than some of the other scenes?
Yeah, Luther, go ahead.
I started off I'm from Pennsylvania, so I started off doing mostly trout fishing and so forth. My family, my father, my brother, my grandparents, they were all into the trout fishing things. So when I started with the art and the fishing, it was mostly trout fishing, that kind of thing. And then I ran into a couple of guys who asked me if I'd ever done any Atlantic salmon fishing. I said, no, I've done some, landlocked salmon fishing, a lot of it in Maine and so forth, but I've never done any Atlantics. And then I was talking with, once again, Chet Renison, who lives near me here. He said, so why aren't you painting any salmon paintings? That's what you need to do. And I said, well, I've never really done it. He says, well, find a way to do it. And so I ran into a couple of guys from the Connecticut River Salmon Association, and they invited me to go up to the Gaspé. And and it was my first experience with Atlantic salmon fishing on the Gaspé, and I just had a blast. And one of the things that impressed me was the fishing itself, and the fish seemed to be it was a powerful fish, and it was elusive, and it was large, and it was athletic, and I thought it was a kick to hook into one, and the scenery, and we fished mostly the York and the Bonaventure, and the York kind of reminded me in the sections we were fishing of, just reminded me a lot of Pennsylvania. You were talking about earlier, John, or about stepping into a 20-foot deep hole, and parts of the York were like that, so it took me back to some of the places fishing in northeastern Pennsylvania, north central Pennsylvania. You had those kind of streams, and the scale was similar to it. But what the difference was, you had these monstrous fish in a very narrow, channel or waterway. And it was just, I thought it was really compelling and exciting. And I really enjoyed the challenge of trying to do something with that. But also, I think even more importantly, it was the people that I got to meet along the way, and the people I got to fish with. And so it became, maybe it would be more about the fish if I caught more fish, but it's basically the association with other anglers and people who were doing the salmon fishing that I thought was a real draw for me. Of course, the Miramichi is a much bigger scale in most places, except you get down in around Doctor's Island and the channels get narrower. So it sort of reminds me of the scale that I'm comfortable with. Yeah, it takes you to some really cool places and introduces you to some really interesting people. And that's basically what I find that I really enjoy about it. John?
Oh, yeah, you got it. Yeah. Where else? If you didn't fly fish, you'd miss all these beautiful places. You know what I mean? You'd stay in a luxury hotel and have a great dinner somewhere, but 15 miles away is an incredible river. I mean, really? And you're right about I feel the same way about the Bonaventure and those Gaspé rivers. It's gin clear water. It's like the Bahamas. You can look down there and count the salmon 20 yards away.
You can count them, and they don't want anything to do with you most of the time.
It's technique, Luther. I'll show you sometime. Technique.
Oh, thanks, Sean.
Oh, no. Yeah, and the people too, especially the Miramichi. I remember the first time I went up there, I'd never salmon fished before. And I grew up landlocked salmon fishing in Rangeley with my grandparents, and I could fly fish pretty well. But I got a phone call back in the early 80s from a friend who was staying at Souter Lodge on the Miramichi and was owned at the time by Don Byrne. Did you know him, Rip, Don Byrne?
For some reason, I mean, I know his name. I never actually met him.
Yeah, he died a few years ago, but he was back in the 80s. He was really involved with the Miramichi and the association and the museum and all that. Well, his friend of mine said, you have to drive up to the Miramichi this weekend. And I said, well, I can't. I've got 2 kids at home. I can't. And my friend said, no, you have to. you have orders from Don Byrne. I said, who the hell is Don Byrne? Well, I found out when I got there, he's the major domo of the river at the time. And he introduced me to salmon fishing. And I went up to Souter Lodge, I don't know how many times and for how many years, and I fell in love with the guides and the people, and K. Lyons, Wavell Price, all these names. And, you know, guys like E.J. Long, did you know him? He was at the Wilsons for years. Anyway, the characters there are just unbelievable. Sitting on the bench with the guys watching the pool is more fun than fishing. You know what I mean? Almost. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. Just talking with them. And those guys at Black Brook, what a bunch of guys. God, unbelievable.
Do you have a favorite painting that you've done of salmon fishing or fishing scene that
Wow.
you like above all of the other ones? And I mean, I realize that sort of.
Yeah, I was thinking about the possibilities. You know, there are a lot of them that I like for different reasons. I think there's one that stands out that I enjoyed finally when it was finished. It was in fact Louis Newell owned it, purchased it, and it was heading out on. It was a scene on the Grand Cascapedia of a couple of guides in a sport heading out, and I just thought I hit the colors nicely, and I didn't feel like I overdid it, and it was. For me, it was a little more colorful than I usually do for a watercolor. It was big, and I liked it, you know, and it just seemed like things worked in that painting. They don't always work there, you know.
But you know when they do, with a watercolor, when you get it, you know you got it.
Oh yeah, you know, sometimes the brush seems to just do its own thing, and when you're in that zone,
yeah,
it seems like, you know, it's rare. You feel like you can't do anything wrong, and that it just went that way, and it turned out, and I liked the way it looked, and it was good.
Getting in the zone is the hard thing. God, I mean, with oils, you don't have to get in the zone right away. You can pick up on it somewhere down the process. But with watercolor, damn, you got to be in the zone the minute you start. If you got the wrong attitude, you might as well just.
Oh, you just, and that's why I got into acrylics. Because I was doing.
Yeah, you can fix it.
Yeah, so I could fix these watercolors that went to dirt, you know, because I was doing a lot of watercolors for Redbone celebrity tournaments and some stuff.
Oh yeah, those guys, Ellis.
Yeah, you know, and that was a great time. You know, those guys were terrific. But I'd have a deadline, as I had to have a painting done. He's got got an event wherever, you know, and so I'd have to do the painting, and it would just turn to dirt. You know how they go sometimes. And I'd end up starting the entire thing over and hoping that it would be fresh. But you know, when the pressure's on with watercolor, you just
better off having a dark and stormy and
that's it. You're gonna have a mud puddle. But so I started fixing things with acrylics, and
yeah, I won't tell anybody.
Hey. Well, it's just like I remember, you know, of course, you know, you probably heard the, you know, in early days of watercolor. Well, you never use white and you never use black. You know, this is the purest way to do it. And I was over at Renaissance. I learned a lot from this guy, more than you could learn from reading a bunch of books. But you know, he got a phone call. I got up and jumped over and looked at his palette. You know, and he had black and he had fake white and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I said to him, I said, "So Chet, you use black, huh?" And he looked at me like I was a total idiot, which I was. And he said, "Of course."
Yeah.
So what do you think Homer did? What do you think Pleisner did? What do you think? Just like,
black.
Of course you do.
Absolutely.
Don't listen to these transparent watercolorist purists. They don't really know what they're talking about when it comes to that. So.
Oh, Chad, you can just look at his painting. He just attacks it. God, he just goes at it with vengeance.
He does.
I love it. They're great.
Yeah, they are.
Years ago, I was on the Alta fishing in Norway. I was with my old friend Don Byrne that I met on the Miramichi, and of course you fished it at nighttime. It never got dark, but you're fishing at midnight till early in the morning. And the Alta, there was no dry wood, and they'd stop at a certain time and make you lunch. And what they would do is the guides would take the gas can out of the boat, go up a little hill and start dumping the gas on an old wet log covered with moss, and set it on fire. Geez, flames go up all over the place. But one time we were there, the flames went right down, the gas had leaked from the boat all the way up the hill. The flames went right down the hill to the boat. Anyway, and I had taken a photograph of my friend Don sitting by the fire with a bonfire and the flames. Anyway, not a classic salmon picture, but if I ever had one back, I'd love to have that one back.
Thank you for taking time out of your day to visit with us. This has really been great from my standpoint, and I certainly hope that all of the folks who are watching tonight got something out of that, and hopefully a bunch of them will make a donation to the Miramichi Salmon Association so they get a chance to perhaps win Luther's Goose Island painting. But thank you both for all of the work you've done for the Miramichi Salmon Association, and thank you for giving us some fun information tonight.
Thanks, guys, and thanks, Rip. In fact, thanks, Rip, for doing the commercial that I was about to have to do in terms of making the National Public Radio announcement again. Glad to move on. Next up, Wade's was one of the pioneering outfitting businesses on the main Southwest Miramichi. It's a big camp, a lot of cabins. It's a really neat place. Let's listen to some stories about the good old days at Wade's from Doctors David and Richard Wade, and with help from lifelong Miramichier, Emery Brophy.
Dawson Hovey here from the Miramichi Salmon Museum on the banks of the mighty Miramichi River. We have with us today Emery Brophy, whose father John was the head guide at Wade's Fishing Lodge for decades, and Doctors David and Richard Wade, whose grandfather Charlie started Wade's Fishing Lodge. Could you tell us, please, maybe David, how and when did Wade's Fishing Lodge get its start?
It started around 1930, basically. My grandfather Charlie opened the lodge, as the sign behind us says, in 1933. But there was an Uncle Harry Allen had used to bring sportsmen up, one or two, just very small potatoes. But he got my grandfather involved with the outfitting, and my grandfather Charlie took it from there along with his brother Clarence. But Clarence bowed out, and my grandfather took over.
In its heyday, gentlemen, how large were its operations? What were its seasons? How many employees and canoes? And how many camps and private pools? And also, how many guests could be accommodated, please?
I'll take that. We had 37 people employed at one time, that being spring. Guides, cooks, cookies, which were the cooks' aides. And we had both 40 canoes, 20 were square ends, the other were a regular canoe. And of course, all the gear that goes with it. Now, the square ends were used mainly in springtime, and we had motors for them all, Johnsons and Evinrudes. And they were a great way of conveyance, but they broke down a lot in those days. And it was just a good time. Everybody got along well. And Dad and my grandfather were great bosses.
Now, how well known and successful were Wade's Fishing Lodge, please, and all its camps? Emery?
Wade's camps were very well known throughout all the U.S. and even they had a lot of people in later years coming from overseas to Wade's camps. They had people from away, but they were very successful. It was because of the I think basically because of the way that the guests were treated while they were there. Charlie Wade was I don't know how you would describe him. He was just a man among men. And Herb was very much like him. I knew all the Wade boys. I knew Charlie's other three boys too. But Charlie was a very fine man, and everybody was treated the same, equal. Whether you were a guest or guide, the cook, the cook's helper, everybody was used the same by Charlie Wade. But there was people, a lot of dignitaries were at Wade's camps over the years, and probably Richard and David will remember some of them.
Yes. Yeah, one of the reasons Rich and I got our driver's license at 16 years old was to start shuffling back and forth the people from the airports, like General Electric, who would bring a lot of people that
Pratt Whitney.
We weren't even allowed to say who was there because it was kind of a perk deal. That
Jimmy Doolittle.
Yeah, all of Pratt and Whitney, the General Dynamics, but it was good for Richard and I to meet all these people and go into their planes. Even I remember going into General Electric's plane. It was DC-3. It was didn't have regular seats in it. It had beds and nice sitting areas. But we met a lot of people, a few ambassadors. We had, as Emery was saying, there was a Lord and Lady from who owned Glennis Castle in Scotland.
Yeah.
There was a few actors and actresses, but it was just it was an ongoing concern. Most people would come for a week. Some people would stay 2. We had one lady, Mrs. Dennison from Florida. She would stay the whole summer. But it was a fun place to be. Richard and I had our own jobs to do there. We wanted to get out and work when we were about 16, because we played a little ball and would have to leave that and go to work at Dad's camp we didn't get paid, but we'd split wood all summer and paint camps inside and out,
and we'd make sure the wood boxes were all filled for the cooks, because I mean we had three cooks, 3 big stoves. We had to keep them well lit. Bernard von Braun was one of our guests, and his brother Otto von Braun, who was representative to the United Nations for Germany at the time.
But we weren't allowed to say who these people were because General Electric brought them in, and they didn't want anybody to know that they were maybe getting some work.
I remember one guy that I brought back. It was Pratt Whitney in the back seat, and the guy that was sitting beside me was the only billionaire in the United States at the time. They called him Chief Wilson, and he was on the board of directors of, I don't know how many companies, but General Electric was one of the companies. He was one of the CEOs of.
Emery, do you have a Ted Williams?
I got to know Ted very well when I was working with the government. I was a federal fishery officer, and I'd meet him quite often. And we had a good working rapport, because if Ted was fishing, I'd never even speak to him, or he wouldn't speak to me. You don't bother him when he's fishing. When he was fishing, that's what he did. But other than that, I knew Ted very well, and he was a very fine gentleman. But I had one of the people from Ottawa down here, and I went out fishing with him one evening on the Renews. Ted happened to be in the pool. He was leaving. He and his guide, Roy Curtis, were going up the trail. And when we went by, I said, "Hello, Ted," and kept on going. And "Hi, Roy." And the guy, when we got down to the shore, he sung out, he said, "That looked like Ted Williams." And I said, "It was Ted Williams." Oh, I wish I had known. I'd love to talk to him. I'd love to meet him, so I just hung out through the woods. "Hey, Ted, would you wait a minute?" So I went up and I introduced him, and they spent a half an hour there chatting. But Ted was a nice man, but don't bother him when he's fishing.
And
Good
don't wear a
advice.
tie when you're around him either.
Yeah.
He took a pair of scissors and he cut it right off of the bow if you were wearing a tie around him.
Dad's favorite tie
Yeah.
in this building.
Yeah.
I think the best years were probably back to the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
Charlie and them seemed to have the business built up to where they wanted it and wanted to, you know, rather than to get more. I don't think they were looking for any business after that. They were trying to maintain what they had because, I mean, the camp in the spring was full. The summers were pretty well always filled. Then things, you know, changed after the 70s and 80s, and there's not as many people come fishing now, and the fish are more scarce. But those were the good times there. Things were always run the same. Didn't make any difference if it was good or bad. Back in the earlier times in the 50s, and we had on this river a commercial fishery below Quarryville where there was salmon stands. And those nets legally had to be tied up at Friday night from 12 o'clock till 12 o'clock Sunday night. And the good fishing was always Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then it would drop down, and then the weekend you wouldn't get much fish. But it was always at the camps, it was a change. Friday they'd be getting ready to go home. Saturday they changed.
Yeah.
Sunday they'd fish and you wouldn't get much, but Monday then you'd get good fishing. So, you know, it worked out well for the outfitters the way it was done, but you know, the fishing was better
I forgot
first of the
about
week.
that. Yeah, you're right.
I think one of our best times was opening the camps. We didn't have any running water then because we had carry water because the pipes would still freeze. But we'd get up early. Rich and I, of course, do the wood pile and chop wood, but help Dad get the camps all, get the beds all made, and get ready for the ice to come out. Even because once that ice was out, you people wanted to fish. So, but Dad, he would, even if there were people booked. He said, "Sir, you can't come. There's no ice. The ice is still in." And they said, "Well, we'll come anyway." He says, "Well, what's the point? You can't cut a hole in the ice." But Dad was like that, even in the summertime when there was no fishing and water low and hot. They'd really look forward to this all year. And Dad would call them and say, "Look, you're going to waste your money coming up here. We'll book you again. Maybe when we do have some water." So the Dad was, and Charlie, like Emery was saying, they were very honest people.
I think we would have to mention one of the guides that was at Wade's camps from the time he was, I'd say 6 years old, and he's still living today.
Jimmy.
And he guided at Wade's camps. He got his guide's license when he was 15, lied his age to get his guide's license, and he guided till he was, just couldn't go anymore. Jimmy Colford.
Yeah.
I remember Jimmy, and I'm sure these boys too. And he was a great guy.
Yeah. And he wasn't very articulate, but he was a great guide, and the sportsmen would ask for him because although he was very difficult to understand, he got along well with them and got them fish where other people, and sometimes if a sportsman came up over the hill without one and somebody else had 2 or 3 fish and you could keep 6 in those days, some of those days anyway, in the early 60s, said, "I want a new guide." You know, they would be a little shizzling there, and sometimes Dad would and Charlie would say, "Look, Jimmy or Jack, you're going to have to take these people here because they're not happy with the guide they have. He's not getting them any fish." But it wasn't the guide's fault. He was just being in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, after my career with the Fisheries and Oceans, I retired in 98, and I spent 10 years working I started off to work as a night warden at Black Brook, but I was only there about a few months, and then I ended up as a guide. And I spent 10 years, and I still go back occasionally to guide in the summer. People come there to the camps, and they still talk about Wade's Camps, and Wade's Camps has been out of business probably 20 years now.
Yeah.
They still talk about Wade's Camps. They mention Charlie and Herb and Jimmy is one of the guides. A lot of them knew my father and the other guides. And, you know, it's nice to be able to sit and talk to people and reminisce about old times. It's wonderful for me to be here today and talk to Richard and David because, you know, when we were young, we had some good times.
Now, Dad had his picture taken at Field and Stream, for Field and Stream. He was the very first centerfold, and it's him casting a line out in front of at the home pool, and he had this
And Sports Illustrated.
His Sports Illustrated, that's what it was.
Field and Stream and Sports Illustrated.
And he had this hat, gray hat with the cotton all around it, stuck with flies. And he thinks that he was the originator of that type of hat. Now, I looked for it home and I couldn't find it. And Richard looked, and I think it might be donated to this museum.
It's donated to this museum.
It's either here or it would have to be here. But we looked for it, and I hope it is here. But, at Dad's funeral, Pat and Emery's uncle and a few of the other guides, Mel and those were live anyway. They were part of the honorary pallbearers, and coming outside the church, I had Dad's hat, and I gave each one of them a fly.
And they said there's one fly that'll never hit the water.
Yeah.
Lovely. If you're a salmon person and you got a Facebook account, you can hardly open your account without seeing posts from Bisey at Country Haven Lodge. He is on top of the marketing of his salmon fishing. He and the staff there are longtime supporters of MSA. And here's a bit about Country Haven.
A quiet afternoon on one of the world's most renowned salmon rivers is just what you need. Country Haven Lodge is a 4-star year-round outdoor adventure resort located on the riverbank of the Miramichi. Take an all-day canoe adventure with an experienced fly fishing guide. Country Haven offers guest packages that include air transportation from anywhere in the world, with choices ranging from all-inclusive lodge accommodations to private self-catering, 2- or 3-bedroom cottage rentals. Watch the wild salmon jump and enjoy the unforgettable thrill of hook and release.
Well, next is Nova Scotia native Deirdre Green has only been fly fishing and fly tying for a few years, but she's already made a name for herself in salmon circles as an avid, especially conservationist. Here she's teamed up with videographer Tim Myers for a bit of salmon fishing at Country Haven.
At the confluence of the Southwest Miramichi and the Canes River, Black Brook is one of the more productive salmon pools on the Miramichi. We had a day and a half left, and I wanted a big salmon. With anglers fishing across from us in both the private and public sections of the river, I felt an explosive rush of excitement course through me as my line tightened and a large, bright fish leapt acrobatically from the water.
So much brighter. The colors so much deeper.
This was the salmon we would land, a gorgeous hen to hand that I couldn't help but give some love before releasing. An epic ending to a breathtaking 2 days, and we still had time ahead of us on this special river.
I've had my doubts, but they're all liars. You're the bird
us landing multiple fish in the first 2 days of our 3-day trip, we were on cloud 9. On our final evening, we had the unique opportunity to fish the historic waters of Doctor's Island. And at dusk, I hooked into another beautiful fish. But what a different fight it was. After a short, powerful run upriver, it immediately felt as if this salmon dove deep within the pool and just dug her heels in. I couldn't move her. She wouldn't budge. I tried all the tricks I knew, but in the end, I had to move far more than that fish to coax her to shore. As this epic battle played out, I couldn't help but think of those that frequented this island over the years far before me. People such as Ted Williams, Joe DiMaggio, and Marilyn Monroe. I wondered who may have outfished too, and what flies were their favorites, what salmon runs were like in those days. Just after sunset on our last night, I released the largest salmon of our trip. That fish from Doctor's Island was the best finale I could have asked for. And to top it all off, we hooked into a handful of spunky grouse the following morning before our departure home. Fly fishing truly takes us to some amazing places. It's easy to see why these fabled waters are beloved by many. Since 1953, the Miramichi Salmon Association has championed Atlantic salmon conservation and stewardship efforts. This hardworking group of passionate individuals rely on our support. Let's do all we can today to thank them for their tireless efforts on behalf of this magnificent watershed.
Sweet, eh? We've already met Celebration Committee member Rip Cunningham in our artist segment. Rip hooked his first salmon at the ripe old age of 9, he told me, on the St. Mary's. It says he's been hooked ever since. He had a stellar business career. One of his more dubious honors, I guess you would call it, he named a fly. And I think it's either the pink or the purple yum yum. I saw a picture of it, and that's probably as close as I'm ever going to get to that fly. But he is a member of the Blackbrook Salmon Club, and we wanted to show some of the neat old clubs that are on the river. So with that, we thought we'd get Rip to tell us about that club.
Good evening. My thanks to all of you who are participating in this evening's MSA Salmon Celebration. I'm Rip Cunningham, and I've had the pleasure of fishing the Miramichi for over 50 years, more than half of that time as a member of the Blackbrook Salmon Club. We all hope that the MSA's work will help to secure the future of salmon in the Miramichi. If we can help do that, then we will have a lot more histories of camps like Blackbrook to reminisce about. Many probably think that Blackbrook has always had the property it currently does at the junction of the Canes and the main southwest Miramichi. The early history was up the Canes at 6 Mile Brook, but the very beginning started right next door to the current camp at Wade's Fishing Lodge. 4 of the early members came up in the late 1950s to enjoy fall bird hunting. And at Charlie Wade's urging, they brought along fishing tackle. Well, on their first day in camp, Charlie said they should try their fishing luck at the A.D. Merrill camp on the Canes. Within short order, all 4 anglers were simultaneously hooked up to salmon. And as a fellow says, they never looked back. They immediately decided to find a camp with some water. They made their thoughts known to Kingsbury Brown, also called Crib, a friend of theirs from Mass and a fellow member of the Laurel Brook Trout Club, and importantly, the owner of 6 Mile Camp on the Canes. He was also the VP of the Miramichi Salmon Association. After several years of their looking, Crib informed them that the Butterfield pool might be for sale. In the winter of 1961, an agreement was reached with Lou Butterfield for a price that seems in today's world to be an incredible bargain. And it was. The one kicker to the deal was that Lou retained fishing rights for life. Thus began the Black Brook Salmon Club as we know it today. Lou put the pool up for sale as he had been sick during the previous winter, and as a good Yankee at 70, he wanted to liquidate some of his hard assets. Well, his health improved, and he remained fishing the pool for another 20 years. During those early years, members stayed at 6 Mile, so by the time they arrived at the pool, Lou would have covered all the good spots and have a number of fish landed. He was a master of the dry fly and inventor of the whiskers. He pioneered the use of lighter tackle in salmon fishing and the use of small hair-wing flies along with Abe Munn. Lou did not use tapered leader, but straight 20-pound test from fly line to fly. He would never false cast with a dry fly. Pick it up, drop it back just where he wanted. He fished every single day of the season. While he never made 500 fish in a single season, he came close a couple of times. Likely, no one has ever caught more salmon on the Miramichi than Lou. Love him or hate him, and there are those on both sides, he was a damn interesting character. He knew a lot about salmon and is a part of the Black Book history. Years after he sold the pool to the club, the policy of having people cast and step down to work through the pool forced Lou off his favorite spot, the dinge. Lou would go ashore and repeatedly mutter, "Jeepers, never should have sold it." As mentioned, in the early days, members stayed up at 6 Mile. Crib Brown, who was one of the 6 founding members of Black Brook, would be in camp for at least a month. During that time, he would not shave and wore a red lumber jacket and heavy boots, greatly resembling a local guide. One time he was sitting on the bank opposite the camp, and who came out of the woods but the splendid Splinter himself. Ted looked at Crib and asked, "Any fish in the pool?" Crib tersely replied, "Loaded." Then Williams asked, "You suppose the old SOB who owns this would let me fish?" Crib replied that the only time the owner was generous was after having a couple. He said to return at 6 p.m. for a drink. When Williams showed up, he realized he had been conned by the man on the bank. They became fast friends, and Williams fished the pool on many occasions. 6 Mile remains a classic fishing camp and became owned by Black Brook as Crib's health began to fail. The club bought the Allen Camp in 1970, which is the club's current location. The Allen Camp gave the club housing right at the Butterfield pool, but it also added the other side of the river, upstream from the open Crown water, colloquially called the 66. It is interesting that this piece of Crown water originally had nothing to do with fishing access. It was access to the river for dumping the winter's cut wood. The wood was stacked high on the bank, and after ice out, it rolled into the river and floated down to the mill. Years later, when Wade's Lodge was sold and became a club operation, they experienced some problems and decided to sell off their holdings piecemeal. Blackbrook was able to add two important pieces to the current puzzle. The Brophy Water on the far bank, which is downstream from the 66, and also the A.D. Merrill Camp on the Canes, known as the Admiral's Camp. That water runs from Hell's Gate right down to the mouth of the Canes. Around the same time, the club made the hard decision to sell the 6 Mile property. During its day, that camp had hosted some famous individuals. Perhaps one of the most famous was A. LaSalle Ripley, a premier sporting artist. On one trip, most likely during the cocktail hour, Ripley did a series of caricature paintings of salmon in the camp bathroom, each one accompanied by a verse of a poem he also wrote. Not meant to be serious art, they playfully pointed out some of the salmon's well-known traits. These last purchases and sale marked the final structure of the club's property. Over the years, a few projects have been done on the pools. The biggest of those was an effort to make sure that Black Brook was able to flow out into the river to provide cold water refuge for fish in warmer temperatures. While it is icing on the cake having a wonderful camp facilities, they will quickly lose their luster without any salmon in the river. And that is why we are here tonight. I urge all of you to do what you can for MSA. Check out the auction or simply make a donation. I hope you have enjoyed this brief journey back through one small piece of Miramichi history. Thank you.
Delightful, just delightful. Up next, spey casting instructor and a longtime guide, Topher Brown, is also the author of the popular book, Atlantic Salmon Magic, and it has a companion volume, 100 Best Flies for Atlantic Salmon. He's generously donated a two-hand casting lesson to our online auction. And while we're here, let's get some casting pointers from Topher.
Well, hello, I'm Brad Burns, and I'm here today to introduce Topher Brown. Topher is the author of Atlantic Salmon Magic, which is really the definitive work on Atlantic salmon in modern times. And he's also a spey casting professional.
And welcome, Miramichi Salmon Association. And we're going to talk a little bit about two-handed overhead casting today. And the big difference between a two-handed overhead cast and a spey cast is the loop and the position of the loop. So on an overhead cast, the back cast is over the tip of the rod on both the back cast and the forward cast. On a spey cast, the back cast is below the tip of the rod, and then the forward cast is over the tip of the rod, which differentiates it from a roll cast. So the other major difference between the spey cast and the overhead cast is we use water to anchor the leader and maybe 5 to 10 feet of the tip of the fly line in order to load the rod in the absence of a traditional back cast. So on an overhead cast, you got that line nice and straight. And when you time it to go forward, you will load the rod. If you have a rod if you have a rear loop like this, you must have water in order to load the rod, otherwise you're going to get something.
Well, Topher, I've been spey casting for a long time myself, and one of the questions that I get asked from time to time is, since we all know that you can make a long spey cast, why do we need an overhead cast? Why would somebody overhead cast at all with a two-handed rod?
That's a good question. And so why overhead cast with a two-handed rod? there's a couple of really good reasons for doing it. One, if you're fishing from a canoe and you're not sitting in the stern, which is normally where the guide sits in a canoe, it's very difficult to get your anchor because the canoe's in the way, or the anchor rope of the 26-foot sharps will be in the way. So the ability to make an overhead cast keeps the line and everything away from the canoe, the other anglers, the guide, and you can fish very well with a two-handed rod by making an overhead cast. For overhead casting is dry fly fishing with a bomber. And one of the advantages to a switch rod, again, 11 to 11 and a half feet, is you can keep your hands quite low when you're casting a bomber right in here. And so if you have any kind of shoulder or elbow problems, you'll see a lot of casters with single-handed rods up in here like this, which definitely puts more strain and stress right there. One of the advantages of a switch rod and overhead casting with a bomber is you get to the end of your drift, two hands on the rod, pick it up, pop it right back out, and then let her drift over the fish, pick it up again, pop it right back out. And you'll see that the hands stay very, very low. They stay below the shoulder. And this allows you to fish pain-free all day. I think the most common mistake that I see people make when spay casting or overhead casting with a two-handed rod is how they hold the line, and also how they hold the rod. You'll see a lot of casters hold the very bottom end of the rod with what we call an OK grip. Sorry, Brad. And OK grip you form with your fingers like that, and you go right down on the bottom of the grip. You can do the same thing up top, make an OK sign with your fingers, and go right here, 3/4 or even all the way to the top of the grip. That's a standard North American style grip. It's not what you would find in Europe, in Scotland, where they invented spay casting. And I find that a thumb on top grip for both the bottom hand and the top hand is not only more powerful because you can really drive it with your thumbs. The other thing that it does for you is if you have the thumb on top on the bottom hand, it acts as a natural backstop.
So for now we're getting to my own personal problem with spay casting, with overhead casting with two-handed spay rods. And that is tailing loops. You know, I started out before I was a spay caster. I just two-handed cast with those. That's how I started. And I always had a problem with tailing loops. But now I don't have it very much. But when I start to push hard, when I'm trying for extra distance, a lot of wind, I start to run into tailing loops. And so I what do you do about that?
It's a good question. First of all, what is a tailing loop? And then we'll talk about how you get rid of them. A tailing loop is a loop that looks like a pigtail. The best way to get rid of them is to understand why you're getting them. And then just remember two simple fixes for a tailing loop. The reason you get a tailing loop is that any caster gets a tailing loop is as they come forward, they apply the power, the real power of the cast too early. So one way to think about it is if that's 12 o'clock, you don't want to apply any power on the forward stroke until after 12 o'clock. So from 12 o'clock to the point of your forward stop, that's when most of the power is applied on the cast. So if you get on the power too early, think of it kind of like drag racing in a car. If you put the pedal to the metal too soon, you're going to spin your rear wheels. And the same basic thing happens in casting. So I'll cast some tailing loops, but it's getting on the power too early on that cast. Probably won't be able to see the loop, but you can see the power application just being too quick.
Yeah, I saw it.
Right there.
Yeah, very
Nice,
well illustrated.
nice big tailing loop. So you've got a headwind, you've been casting great, the wind changed, you went around the bend, and all of a sudden you're getting some tailing loops. As soon as you see that first tailing loop, take a deep breath and go, I don't need to cast harder in order to get my line to go in the wind. I need to cast cleaner to get my line to go into the wind. A nice tight loop will go into a headwind better. And how do I get a nice tight loop? I want to get on the gas late in the cast. So apply it as late as you possibly can before the stop, and your tip won't deflect down and then pop back up, which is what makes that tailing loop. Your tip will go in a straight line right to the target.
Well, there we go. Wilson's on the Miramichi River has been in business, serving sportsmen and professional clients since 1855. The Wilson family's been incredibly generous with donations of time on the water, accommodations, meals, whatnot, to MSA's fundraising auctions for years. We deeply appreciate that. And let's see a little bit about Wilson's.
Operating for almost 150 years, Wilson Sporting Camps provides great Atlantic salmon fly fishing, outdoor adventures, and dining on the Miramichi River. Cast a fly rod right outside of the main lodge. Open year-round, Wilson's offers world-class lodging with a variety of lodges and suites. Wilson's licensed dining room is open to the public, so stop in for a delicious meal with a great view. Wilson Sporting Camps is designed with your comfort in mind.
I find that the world of salmon anglers is indeed a small one. Our next presenter, Pat Boland, and I are both on the board of the Miramichi Salmon Association, and at a meeting a year or two ago, just making conversation, he asked me where I grew up, and I said, near Buffalo, New York. Where near Buffalo, New York? Oh, a suburb, Kenmore. Where in Kenmore? Well, over near Benjamin Franklin's school. What street? Well, Moore Avenue. He said, well, I grew up on Harrison. He grew up 1 block away from me at the exact same time of our lives. He's just a couple of years older than me, but we both lived there for, I don't know, 18 years or so. So it's just an amazing small world. And it's been delightful to get together with Pat again. Pat has been a fly fisher for more than 60 years and is the current president of Doctor's Island Club. So who better to give us a peek into that club than Pat?
Good evening, and thank you for supporting the MSA. I am Pat Boland, the president of the Doctor's Island Club. I will speak tonight about the island and the club that occupied it for over 50 years. The 6-acre island in the town of Blackfield is named for its first medical doctor. In the late 1700s, Dr. William I. Deere was granted 125 acres for his service in the British Army. The doctor, his wife, and 2 daughters settled on the island. Dr. I. Deere treated the early settlers who lived on both sides of the southwest Miramichi and was well known for his herbal remedies. In the 1950s, a botanist found over 170 medicinal herbs still growing on the island. The doctor died in 1833, but not before he and his family moved upriver to another island between Doketown and Blissville. Maybe he was a fisherman. We don't know the history of the island over the next 100 years. We do know that the island began its link to sport fishing in the 1930s. Late in that decade, Paul O'Hare left New York City and an advertising career for a simpler life in Blackville. O'Hare bought the island and built a log structure as a main lodge and 4 smaller half-log-sided camps spread out over the island. A guide camp and a boathouse completed the inventory of buildings. O'Hare ran the commercial sport fishing lodge and doubled as the chef. O'Hare hired Max Vickers as a guide, and the pair developed a reputation for Doctors Island as a relaxing, family-oriented location. Fishing and non-fishing wives were encouraged to accompany their husbands. Roy Victor's sons recall spending summer vacations on the island during O'Hare's time. The bulk of his clients came from New York and Boston area. Illustrative of that fact is that Yankee Joe DiMaggio and Red Sox Ted Williams were loyal clients of Doctors Island. In the short time that Marilyn Monroe was married to DiMaggio, she accompanied him on a trip to the island. On leaving, Marilyn gave O'Hare a big kiss. This was one of the highlights of his life and is mentioned in his obituary. Paul O'Hare built a successful, well-known lodge, and Max Vickers was now head guide and fishing manager by the 1960s. O'Hare wished to retire in 1966, and he struck a deal with the newly incorporated Doctors Island Club to buy the property. The buyout group was headed by Roy Victor. He was then a partner in the law firm of Cravath, Swain and Moore. Roy was later the presiding partner in that same firm. One of Victor's clients was the Chicago-based Field family, which was then represented by Marshall Field V. Victor and Field gathered a group of their friends and O'Hare's clients to form the club. This group originally totaled 7. Victor and Field remained active in the club until Victor's death in 1992. Field resigned in that same year. The welcoming, family-friendly atmosphere continued with the club. The members employed Max Vickers as manager, and his wife succeeded O'Hare as cook. One son, Brent Vickers, took his father's place upon his retirement. Another son, Bentley, also guided at the club. Several other experienced guides in the area worked at some point for Doctors Island Club. The only change on the island from O'Hare's time was to build a new sleeping camp next to the main lodge. The camp was supposedly built to placate some of the members' wives. The building was given the imaginative name of the new camp and has 2 bedrooms with ensuite bathrooms. It has a large living room, screened-in porch, and more importantly, electric heat. Fishing at the club covers all seasons and most water conditions. There are 3 good pools around the island. The area on the north side of the island is good in mid to the high water levels, while the other side has the bar or home pool plus Goose Island. The bar is arguably one of the best low water pools on the river. It has a good channel plus excellent holding water alongside the old railway bridge abutment. Goose Island has good holding water above a short rapid plus a long channel. Off the island, we have Vickers Pool upriver of the Hershey Club. This fishes well in most water levels and contains many cold water springs. Downriver from the island, we have Gray's Rapids, which is good in mid to low water. Downriver from Gray's is White Rapids and the Funnel Pool, which we share with the Miramichi River Club. These are good low water pools. On the Canes, we have the Musserole Pool below the brook of the same name. This is a first-class pool in the fall if the water is not too low. We also have a 4-bedroom camp there with a kitchen and dining area. Many members used to spend the late season at the Musserole camp. The camp is off the grid and has no cell phone service. Members no longer stay at the camp, but make day trips in the fall. Sitting on the porch between rotations is still quite a treat. Getting there on deteriorating dirt roads is not so much fun, but can be interesting. Staying on the island is always great. The sleeping camps, other than the new camp, are quite rustic. This is a preference going back to the O'Hare days. All have electricity plus running water and showers. These are heated with wood stoves, which enhances the rustic charm, but makes for some cold mornings in the fall. The river sounds are comforting and the breezes cool the summer nights. The white pines, wildflowers, and a feeling of isolation contribute to the charm of the island. Getting to the island requires a boat trip across the back channel. Brent Vickers and his father before him liked to drive a roundabout, bumpy trip across the river by truck. This was never my preference and cost us at least one truck. In any case, the trip to the island requires a call for a pickup. Before cell phones, a stop at the Blackville Irving for the payphone was needed. The main lodge is the island's largest structure. The kitchen is attached, and all meals are served at one long table. There is always a fire in a large stone fireplace in cold weather. The long front porch affords an expansive view upriver. Salmon can be seen making their way over the gravel bars on both sides of the island. The island was particularly interesting during the flood of 2017. The river rose over 6 meters, but the camps were never seriously threatened. We did lose a couple of plywood boats, plus various stairs and benches. We were able to get off and on the island, even in the first morning, in a flat-bottom aluminum boat with an outboard motor. Most of the first 2 days were taken up with sitting on the front porch and watching flotsam run down the river. We even tried unsuccessfully to lasso a beautiful Sharp's canoe. The membership turned over gradually. Roy Victor's son David took over from his mother in 1994. David stayed with the club until 2012. Marshall Field did not pass his shares to another family member. Total membership peaked in 1995 at 12. After Roy Victor, Charlie Dodge led the club, and he was succeeded by Don Calder. Aaron Kennan took the reins from Calder, and I succeeded Aaron. In the early days, the club sourced its membership from Victor's friends in New York and Field's Midwest connections. After Field resigned, most members came from the Anglers Club of New York. Max Vickers retired in the early 2000s, and his son Brent then managed the club. Our membership had fallen to 10 in 2016, and several members were asking to leave. Our expenses continue to grow, and we experienced fewer fishing days. The revenue earned from the member and guest fishing days was falling, and the annual deficit was rising. The club had always operated on O'Hare's commercial lodge format. We never assigned the entire camp to a member to be filled by the member and his guests or paid by the member. We didn't feel that this structure would work and therefore decided to sell the island and lay off our employees. The sale was completed in 2018, and we continued with 6 members and our 4 remaining pools. We stay with Country Haven and use its guides. This structure has worked well, and we expect to carry on and keep the club's name for the foreseeable future. Finally, we are pleased that the island's pools are in firm hands and actively fished.
Thanks, Pat. Well, we all have Brad Burns to thank for being the driving force behind organizing this event, as well as our online auction and raffle. His first book, Closing the Season, is a wonderful read that really gets to the heart of fishing for Atlantic salmon and how we feel about it and how we think about it. Here we have Brad with a reading from his latest book, On the Canes, which is really the finest river book I've ever read.
Author of 2 books inspired by Atlantic salmon, Closing the Season and On the Canes. This evening, I'm going to read you 3 selections from my latest book, On the Canes. The first passage is from the introduction. The anglers I know who have fished the canes over the years, the attraction the river has for them is magnetic. From a lifetime of angling, the memories they have of fishing the fall salmon run against an unspoiled backdrop of dark green spruce and colorful hardwoods, or seeing 20-inch plus brookies sipping the emerging insects from a headwaters pool in June are among their most cherished memories. And for more than a few, these are memories that they shared with their fathers and even their grandfathers, who were also drawn to this place and fished with previous generations of men from the same families that are still guiding on the Canes River today. The second passage is from a chapter about the various pools on the Canes River, and it describes how you can connect the dots from the men who founded the sport fishery in the early 1900s right down to today's guides and anglers. It is very difficult in 2018 to find a living person who has a clear memory of the chain of people that go back to Harry Allen's time and essentially to the beginning of Canes River salmon fishing. I interviewed Gary Crawford regarding his Canes River history on January 4th, 2018. His memory was very sharp, remembering accurately as other research work verified the timing of property purchases, employment, camps being built or torn down, and so on. Gary said that Coleman Moore was a client of Harry Allen and took the week-long canoe trips with Harry's staff down the Canes River. William Crawford, Gary's grandfather, guided and cooked on these trips, and he met Coleman Moore that way. In Seabury Stanton's camp log, it says that in 1938, on their first trip to George Allen's camps, Bill Crawford was one of their guides. He must have stayed on with George after Harry's death in 1932. Clearly, Coleman became enchanted with the Canes, and William Crawford helped him to find a property of his own to purchase on the river. Moore usually brought several friends up for kelp fishing, and Gary Crawford began guiding there while he was a teenager in the 1950s. Gary says that spring fishing opened on April 1 in those years, and the Canes often iced out earlier than the Miramichi. In some years, they fished in areas of open water between still frozen stretches of the river. When the river did ice out completely, the guides would take Moore and his guests as far upriver as the Arbo Pool and follow the kelp migration back down the Canes. There were many more fish in the run in those days, and Gary said that there were always fish on the line, and he would often spend all day long unhooking salmon. In those years, a shore lunch was cooked every day by the guides, and it often was Gary's duty. Some days, Gary would cook for as many as a dozen men. The meals were usually steak and fish, and the fish were kelts. Gary said that kelts had always been eaten by the people along the river, and that he preferred them to bright salmon, since they were not as oily or overly rich as fresh-run salmon can sometimes be. The last passage I'm going to read you tells the story of a modern-day fishing trip taken in August of 2016. In 2016, the warm weather again set in during late July and early August. On August 12th, water hit a low of 1/2 meter, very low water, but a week of rainy weather was forecast. I called Jim Growl, who was often good for leaving on the spur of the moment, and on August 14th, we drove up through the rain. The Blackville gauge reported a water height of 1.2 meters the following day. This was a significant raise of water. One of our guides, Darrell Warren, said that he had run into one of the guides from the Blackbrook Salmon Club that morning at the Irving in Blackville, and they had absolutely killed them the evening before. All the fish, he said, were caught right at the mouth of the Canes River. We really lucked out and had a drizzly, cool, rainy weather from our start on August 15th, running right through our last day on August 18th. This kept the water between 63 and 65 degrees. The height gradually increased to 1.3 meters. Jim and I put 22 in the net, fishing just mornings. Country Haven had the pool in the afternoons, and doubtless they also did very well. These were mostly grills, but there were salmon of 18 and 17 pounds in our catch. I later heard that folks did quite well up at Buttermilk and Salmon Brook as well. We watched salmon rolling on the surface from all the way down to the corner by Hooper's to as far as we could see up the river towards Herman Campbell's. Clearly, a large percentage of this group of fish had been holding at Black Brook and were just waiting for a good flow of water to head into the Canes. We were in the right place at the right time, but it wasn't entirely by luck.
Well, on behalf of the Atlantic Salmon Celebration 2021 committee members, Brad Burns, Rip Cunningham, Ralph Vitale, David Fenderson, and myself, I hope you've enjoyed the evening. Our deep thanks to all the segment contributors and to MSA staffer Butch Dalton for all their contributions to help us make this a successful event. And of course, the last little reminder, if you enjoyed the evening, we hope you'll make a donation to the cause of wild Atlantic salmon with MSA. You can go to miramichisalmon.ca. If you've already made a donation, thank you. We appreciate it. Don't forget our online auction and raffles, and thank you all for spending your evening with us. We hope you had as much fun watching as we did doing. Stay safe out there and have a good night.